Alidial, Emily, Brendan, and Jason will be joined at the end by Susan Shee, who is also on the young adult team at NYPL. Thank you again for being here today, and over to you, Alidial.
Hi, Brendan and Jason. It's great to speak with you today. As Caitlin mentioned, I'm a teen reading ambassador at the library. Teen reading ambassadors work after school with kids between the ages of 6 to 12 on homework and enrichment activities. To get our conversation started, how about you tell us a little bit about All American Boys?
Oof, it's a good question. First of all, thank you for having us today. We're so grateful to be here, and we're so proud to be a part of this. Tell you a little bit about All American Boys. Brendan, where should we start? I guess should we start at the conceit, or should we start at the book itself?
Let's start from the very beginning, man. Let's do it.
Yeah, so this is what happened. Brendan and I were on tour together in 2014, which is a long time ago.
It's a long time ago, man.
Yeah. And I said the number and I was like, oof, this is a long time ago. So 10 years ago, Brendan and I are on tour. So we're running around the country promoting our debut novels, When I Was the Greatest, and he had a novel called The Gospel of Winter. And it just so happened that during this tour and during this year of us traveling around the country promoting other books, we were experiencing not necessarily an uptick, but an uptick in the visibility of police violence, specifically amongst Black and brown people. This is the year that Michael Brown is killed. We're coming off the sort of we're coming off the travesty of Trayvon Martin. All sorts of things are happening in this country around this particular topic. And Brendan and I every single day are moving around, watching it on the news, or we're entering into different cities. And you know, you have that moment where you realize that everybody has on a suit at the table and is talking about how they feel about it, but no one's actually asking any questions about what the young people might feel. What do the teenagers feel? The kids who are dying, who were dying at this time, were your age, right? And no one was saying, like, I wonder what they're going through. I wonder how they're coping with it. I wonder how they're talking about it. We're watching the uprisings take place, and the uprisings are full of teenagers. And yet no one is questioning this sort of emotional onslaught that so many young people were going through. And so that was the beginning of Brendan and I trying to figure out what our roles are and what we have to contribute to the conversation.
You know, Jason, there's one memory I have about our time traveling that kind of sticks with me and is in some ways it kind of like signals for why we would co-write All American Boys together. And I'll never forget how, since we were traveling around after the murder trial of Trayvon Martin, and your mother called you to say that she was worried for you, that she was, concerned as you were traveling around the country, that there might be a George Zimmerman out there for you. And my mother didn't call me. My mother would have no cause for the same concern. And I remember that kind of being a startling kind of recognition, at least for me, of what it means like to live in kind of two Americas living side by side, and what it would be like if we were to portray that as vividly as possible in a novel together.
So I really love to hear that because like as soon as I opened the book, I was really surprised to see that there were two different narratives. It felt like two books in one. And so the next question, so this question is for the both of you. And like I'm already talking about the imagery like as soon as I opened the book. And when I first opened the book, I was really captivated by Rashad's perspective. And then I turned to the next chapter and I saw Quinn's and I was like, hold on. I get two books. Like I'm opening this book and I was like really happy. And it honestly felt like a treat to have these two books in one. And I know that you guys have touched up on this already, but I wanted to know because I rarely see this dual point of view approach adopted in books. And what inspired both of you to write All Americans as a dual point of view? If you could like sum up on that a bit more. And let's hear from Jason first and then Brendan.
You know, it's interesting. Because the honest answer to that question is Brendan wanted to, right? And it's important that, I just believe that we have to make sure we tell the truth when it's time to tell the truth. This book is interesting because a lot of people think that this was my idea. just because as the Black person in this relationship and the person who has a closer proximity to the violence, the assumption is I would want to make this book. The truth of the matter is I did not want to make this book because I am so close to the violence, right? So because I'm so close to it, I'm like, I'm not interested in intellectualizing my life in that way. And it's a little too raw for me to do so. Plus, I didn't want to tell a victim story, right? Brendan, on the other hand, was like, yo, we should do this. We should do it. We should do it. And he couldn't. I let him speak for himself, but I remember him telling me he couldn't find any books that were talking about the responsibility of the onlooker, the responsibility of the white people involved or not involved, the white people who are our neighbors, right? Like, what is the responsibility of a citizen, of a neighbor who may not have any brush ups with police officers, but still live in this country and have to sort of contend and reckon with, let alone reconcile the truth of these situations, right? And so we're like, oh, okay, this might work. Plus, for me, it was cool when he asked this because I felt like now I have an opportunity to tell a story that feels even more honest because I don't have to overly concern myself. Like, one, because Rashad gets to live.
Yes.
Right. If there's another person in the story and we get to have this dual narrative, then my character gets to live. And this was very important for me because I think the tricky part about these stories is that the easiest way to tell them is to tell them from the perspective of a kid who dies. And the truth is that most of us who experience this don't die and have to carry the weight of that experience for the rest of our lives. Got to live with that kind of pain and that kind of trauma. Got to go through undoing our fears, the therapy that's involved, the breakdown of communication in families and so forth and so on that happens. You carry, I remember we're both in our 40s. So this happened to me when I was 16. So imagine what it feels like to be 40 and still carrying that weight. That's that's closer to the truth than like every single time this happens, a kid dies, right? And so to have Brendan there to say, and I'm going to tell the other side of that story, which is if that kid survives, who doesn't even have to be concerned about whether they live or die and gets to ignore it and pretend that life is still sweet. And how do we sort of hold those people accountable and challenge them lovingly, but honestly? And I think that it was the most important part of the story for me.
And I just want to add to that, so I worked at a high school in New York City for 10 years before Jason and I met, and I was consistently and constantly around lots of young folks, right? And I taught 10th grade English for years, and I wanted there to be stories that reflected the lives of all different kinds of kids growing up in the city, right? And for me, as Jason's talking about, there didn't seem to be many books that spoke about racism and asked white people like myself and young white folks like my younger self to really reconcile with our proximity to all of the racial violence and ask ourselves questions about accountability. Just because it isn't happening to me doesn't mean that I don't have some role to play. Just because it isn't happening to me doesn't mean that the reason it's not happening to me is because I'm consistently too silent about it happening to others. Meaning that part of my privilege is that I can turn away and look away and not actively involve myself in the situation and pretend like it's only happening over there to other people, as opposed to recognizing that my privilege is precisely what's protecting me. I mean, to be frank, there are tens of thousands of people whose lives are threatened or have been killed across the world right now who are dying because too many of us are silent, because we need to say something about what's happening when people are dying, right? We need to talk about what's happening in Gaza. We need to talk about what's happening in the streets of America when people are being killed. And so I think it's important that we recognize that that silence in and of itself is a kind of privilege. And why not bring that into a book that young folks in our country can talk about and wrestle with from two different perspectives. So if you feel like you're the folks who have been speaking up for decades and decades and decades, you hear your voice told in the story. Or if you feel like you're someone who is kind of wants to be engaged but not sure, you hear your perspective too, and like, yes, I should be speaking up too. And you can hear both sides of that. As the librarian Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop has said and has been quoted many times, it's a book that includes windows and mirrors, right? Depending on which side of the narrative you read and you see yourself more in, you have a window and a mirror in both sides of the book. And so that was part of the inspiration as to how can we do this and be race conscious about the way that we write this book together as a Black man and a white man writing this book together. By the way, I also just love your questions. And I didn't get to say at the very beginning that I super appreciate being interviewed by two teens, because again, as a former high school teacher, like I just miss hanging out with you all. So this is like this is makeup for lost time. So I appreciate you both.
Shame. You see, look into your future, young folks. This is what your future is. Brendan, Kiely. You're gonna always be hanging out with young people. I just miss being a young person. It was sweet.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Hi, thank you. I found that what Brendan said was highlighted in a lot of the book, especially in Quinn's perspective. And that's why one of my questions was that when I was reading, I found that it explored the role of bystanders in the face of injustice, which is a conversation that I find that not a lot of people are ready to have. What inspires you to highlight the community reactions, and what message are you aiming to convey about joint responsibility? Let's start with Brendan and then Jason.
Wow, that's a fantastic question. And I have to say that as a teacher, I was inspired by students in my classroom first. Because when I was teaching, there's a scene in All American Boys, right, where they're reading Battle Royale in class, which is what becomes the first chapter of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And when I was a high school teacher, I was trying to find interesting texts to use in my classroom. And I myself was up against some struggles of how I present that very same story in the classroom. And I remember students in my class speaking up and having real feelings and kind of, in some ways, kind of leading me through a discussion that I realized I was stumbling through in one of my first years teaching high school. And I wanted to honor the intelligence, wisdom, and courage of young folks like those students in my classroom and bring that into the novel in some way. Because I think that all too often, old broken folks like me just assume that we're there to like download our information without relying on the experiential wisdom of the young folks in the room. And they have a lot of experiential wisdom because they're living their lives. And with regards to the other part of your question about the community, so as that's kind of like one piece of the brain, or sort of inspiring a part of the writing brain for the story. Another piece is that when Jason, as he mentioned earlier, and I were traveling around the country in 2014, not only were these, highly visible incidents of police violence against primarily Black folks, but also Indigenous folks, and also lots of different folks from the global majority here in the United States. Well, not only were we witness to that in some way through the news or in our neighborhoods or whatever it might be, but so too were we witness to communities coming together and speaking up about it. We saw marches in Baltimore. We saw marches here in New York City. We saw marches all across the country. And Jason and I really wanted to honor that community spirit as opposed to a book that gets into the legalese and ends up in the courtroom. Why not end up in the streets where all the people are? Why not tell a story that is about the community coalescing? So I just can't tell you how grateful I am for your question, because I think it's brilliant. Thanks very much.
And on my side, it was a little different, right? My task was different. Brendan was writing a particular story with a very different task than I had. My task was on the opposite side, was how do we strip the young Black person from the stereotype that they have to be superheroes? How do we humanize the victim, right? Because what happens is a person gets victimized, and what we say is that like, oh, now it's human enough for it to affect us a particular way, but then we quickly turn that human being into a symbol, into a monument, into a hashtag, into everything but a human being. And in doing so, we then strip them of their human emotions, one of which is fear. It's fear, right? And so like I had a conversation with my mom And we were talking about, my mom loves to tell the story every year about her time at the March on Washington. And one thing that she always tells me is, son, the history books and the documentaries would have you believe that every Black person in America was at the March on Washington. She was like, but most people didn't come because people were afraid. My mom, born and raised in DC, right down the street from the monument. And she said that nobody else in her family, her sisters, her cousins, her parents, her aunties, nobody else went down there because they were scared. They were afraid. And the truth of the matter is, we all know what that's like, right? I'm sure the two of you have friends, and in your friendship circles, everybody's got a different personality. You got the one homie who always turned and who ready for whatever, right? You got that friend, and you need that friend. And then you got another friend who's a little bit like, yo, like, I ain't really with it. I don't know if I'm with all of that. Like, we could do some of it, but we can't do all of it. And then you got the friend who like, yo, y'all know I'm too scared to do all of it. I can't do none of this. I'm going home. Y'all tell me how it go. Like, you know what I mean? I bail y'all out, right? You got that friend, right? It's like, and so we wanted to be honest about what that looks like in terms of the bystander, in this case, being the kid who actually has experienced it, and the urge to say, I just want to be a regular person and I want my life to go back to normal. And I know I should stand up for what's right, but I'm a person who's confused and anxiety ridden and afraid, and I have a right to be all of those things too.
There's been a sort of mistake with like a question was skipped, so I'm sort of going back, and I'm really sorry about that.
Be
But
sorry.
I had a question for Jason, and basically, like I even said this in the beginning when I first opened the book, I saw, a lot of imagery in the book, and I really love that. Like, both of you are just wonderful authors, and I could feel like I'm in the shoes of each of the characters. And so I wanted to ask Jason, so the imagery is just immaculate. I'm gonna keep saying that. It truly immerses me in the experience. And that scene at Jerry's, there's this contrast between Rashad's ROTC uniform and the situation that's happening. And that's like such a stark contrast. And I wanted to know, what does the juxtaposition between Shad's ROTC uniform and the situation at Jerry's represent in a broader lens?
Wow. I don't know if anyone, we've been touring this book this is 10 years now. No, this is 8 years. We've been touring this book. Came out in 16, right, Brendan? 15, 16, 16?
15.
15. So this is almost 10 years. And I don't think anybody's ever asked that question. So good on you. I think it represents a lot of things. Number one, there's this idea that if you got that uniform on, that suddenly you'll be shielded from some of this prejudice. And the truth is that all of our heroes died in suits, right? Like, we know for a fact that, listen, you can button up, put on your suit. Dr. King wore suits every day. Malcolm X wore suits every day. Medgar Evers wore suits every single day, right? Like, these were people who wore those suits. I mean, my father and my uncles were all in Vietnam and came home, and that suit meant nothing because they still couldn't ride on the front of the bus. They still couldn't eat where they wanted to eat after serving their country with that uniform on. Right. And so I think the first thing is that it's a commentary on sort of the things that we believe to be force fields, right? Like whether or not we have correct English, we speak correct English, or we got nice clothes on, or all these things that we try our best to use as some sort of shield from it, doesn't always work. The other thing, though, is that it's a question about what it means to fall in line, right? That uniform is about I mean, it's a uniform first and foremost, right? Uniform is a way to connote uniformity, falling in line, taking orders, being sort of being a cog in the machine, sort of, in that way. And how he struggles with it in the book, right? He can't, for him, it's like, yo, I do it because my dad wants me to do it. And that's all real, by the way. My father tried to force me into ROTC and into the military because he thought it would save my life. And I felt the way Rashad, and I didn't do it, but I felt the way Rashad felt, where it's like, yo, I don't want to do this. Isn't my thing. I don't like any of this. So that's sort of on the sort of micro level, and on a macro level, it's saying, what does it mean to try to force our young people into uniformity? Right? You deserve to be who you are. Both of you deserve to be exactly who you are in all of your quiet or grandeur, right? And all of your uniqueness. And if you're conservative or a wild child or whoever it is you are, you have every right to be. And no one needs to sort of force you into uniformity, force you into line. Because I think that in and of itself is also a kind of violence, and it does not shield you. You might as well be who you are, right? Be as free as you can, because this country is this country regardless. So you might as well do your dance, right? And we'll figure out the rest. And so that's what it was all about, just making sure that we did show the juxtaposition. And Brendan is on Brendan's side too, right? There's military stuff going on his side too for the same reasons, to make sure that we're always bumping up against those two ideas.
And forgive me, I know this was for Jason, but I appreciate you mentioning that too, Jason, because Quinn's father died in the war in Afghanistan. And when I was teaching high school, and even for a few years after this book came out, every single student in America had grown up for all the years of their lives. All the years of their lives, our country was at war in Afghanistan. So, we're talking about an entire generation of people who grew up with that war going on. And I think there's something relevant to ask ourselves on a big picture level about what it means for a country to invest that much in war and not in peace, and not in peace within its own streets. And so it made sense to us to try to make some analogies between what's kind of going on a macro level when you invest in revenge like that, as we did after 9/11. And I'm speaking as somebody who was right there down on the street in Federal Plaza on 9/11. So it's not as if I'm speaking not out of personal experience. And what that means when we prioritize that on the macro level, and then we do it again on the micro level, down on a local level. And so I really, really, again, appreciate this question so much, because I think it's so astute to point out these aspects of the book that we don't get to talk about enough. So I'm just grateful.
And we should be clear, because not everybody watching, we've learned over the years that not everybody watching is may be as astute as the two of you. And so I also want to say that this is not an indictment to soldiers. It's not what we're talking about, right? I want to be clear.
Thank you.
People are always taking things and twisting them around. This has nothing to do with the men and women who serve our country. It's nothing to do with that, right? I take my hat off to you because I don't have the courage to do so, right? So it's not about that. It's about using the ideas around that and sort of metaphorizing, right? Turning it into the symbolism to make a commentary about something else is what we're trying.
And I'll say likewise, Jason, neither are we anti-police. We both have law enforcement and, frankly, military in both of our families, right? And absolutely hats off to the individuals who are doing those incredibly difficult jobs. It's not about that, but it is about systems that we could ask questions about, for sure.
That sort of brings me into my next question. And this question is for Brandon. And basically, in Quinn's first chapter, we see the reference to the book title. And all throughout the book, I continuously see All Americans said. And I just fangirl when I see that. I'm just like, All Americans. I just love the book so much. And so when we get to Quinn's part, I know that Quinn has this struggle of there's a positive stereotype. He is the all-American boy. He is the boy that comes from, a white family, family in the military, and Rashad does too. But Quinn sort of more so embodies that. And he is experiencing a positive stereotype. And I wanted to know, based on Quinn's experience as an all-American boy, what can we learn about the danger of stereotypes, even if they're positive?
That's a great question. When I was in middle school, oh my God, this is such a great question. When I was in middle school, I wanted to be a child actor and model. And I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. Don't hold it against me. And I was part of this cameo agency. I did commercials for pizzerias and all this other stuff. But I will never forget this one casting director say to me, "Hey, Brendan, we want you for this commercial because you, Brendan, you look like the all-American boy." And what I didn't know at the time, but could reflect on in hindsight, was really the inherent racism in that. Why do I look like the all-American boy? There's an assumption about some of the whiteness in that phrase that I think requires deconstruction and critique. And I was hoping that with our book, we could begin to criticize that assumption. And what's a positive stereotype? This question is so good. A positive stereotype is still a stereotype, right? It's still limiting in some fashion or another, or it's exclusive or excluding in some fashion or another. And I think about all the various students that I have had, in my many years of teaching, whether it was high school or now at the college level and at Seton Hall in New Jersey. And I think about how many different kinds of people are in my classroom and how they are all American. Whether we're talking about young Muslim students in class, whether we're talking about young Arab American students in class, whether we're talking about white or black or indigenous or et cetera, et cetera. And so why can't we begin to think of ourselves in terms of the plural and not the singular? Aren't we all American boys and girls and folks across the gender spectrum?
I think that was a wonderful answer. Just so well answered. And I'm gonna pass the mic to Elidel because I know she has questions to ask.
Thank you, Emily. So my next question is for the both of you. So your novel beautifully explores how activism and speaking out for what's right plays a role in reversing injustice. How do you hope that this inspires young readers to engage in conversations about these topics? Let's start with Jason and then Brendan.
Oof. I mean, there are a few things, and now I'm going to try to make this brief because I want to make sure we get as many questions as we can. I think number one, I think it's important for young people to know that it does not matter if you know a person or not to feel the injustices that have been done, right? The harm that has been done. I think sometimes we feel like, well, I don't know, well, it ain't happening in New York City, so you know what I mean? It is what it is, and it's like it doesn't have to happen in New York City for you to care. It doesn't have to happen in your borough or in your neighborhood, on your block for you to care. You are exposed to more than any generation before you has ever been exposed to. You are seeing the country play out in ways that we never got an opportunity to see just because we didn't have social media, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have all those things that you all now have. And so it's really difficult for you all now to turn a blind eye. It should be difficult for you all to turn a blind eye. The human part of you should kick in, right? That empathy should kick in, whether or not you know a person or not, whether or not they're in your city or in your borough or neighborhood or not. That's the first thing, right? We are all we got. And when I say we, I mean the collective we. Humanity is all humanity has. So if you don't care about your fellow human, then I don't know what this country or this world looks like in the next 50 years. The second thing I want you all especially to know is that there is a big, big, big difference in being irreverent and being irresponsible. I don't want to live in a world where young people are not irreverent. You all need to be irreverent in order for things to change. And what I mean by that is you have to shake the table. If you mad or if you don't like something or if you're uncomfortable, then shake the table. That is literally a part of your job as young people. It is a part of growing and growing up and becoming whoever it is that you are becoming, right? If you don't like it because the old heads do it in a way that you think is wrong, then shake the table. Yeah, it's gonna make us upset, but it's supposed to. It's a part of the gig of youth. Right? It's a part of the gig of youth, but there is a difference when it comes to being irreverent and being irresponsible. What is the difference? The difference is simply thoughtfulness, intention, and planning. If you're going to shake that table, don't shake it for no reason, right? Think about it, be thoughtful, plan it out, and figure out a way to do it in a way that is safe and intentional.
I'm only going to add, because we're talking about banned books here, right? The part of the intention of this book is to spark these conversations and have young folks wrestle with all of these topics and ideas in a book, in conversations around a book. And so, hats off to the NYPL for doing a whole series around banned books, because books provide a forum in which we can discuss these ideas and shake those tables, as Jason is saying, right? Also in a way that gets us so we can get to the idea that we want to get to. We can work it out a little bit by discussing Rashad and Quinn, and not having necessarily to discuss our own lives at first. We can open the door and find the language with which to have the conversation by talking about it in a book first. Books provide safe spaces. And for folks who say that, you know, therefore we should ban these or get them off the shelves, they're essentially shutting down the conversation. They're bottling up that pain and that confusion, especially in young folks. And if they expect that it won't explode, they're dead wrong. And history has proven them wrong. Because when you banned books in Germany, it was wrong. When you banned books in Chile and Argentina and all across South America in the 1970s, it was wrong. When you're banning books in Russia or in China or in North Korea right now, it's wrong. And when you're banning books in the United States of America, it's wrong.
I think that was well said. And I'm just going to segue into a different question because this is more so about the hashtag. The hashtag Rashad is absent today. And that was so straightforward. And when I saw that, it basically gave me goosebumps. And I wanted to know what prompted you both to make this sentence the mantra of the movement in this book. Hashtag Rashad is absent. And so let's hear from Brendan and then Jason.
I'm just going to say that was the original title of the book.
That was the title of the book.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, Jason? I mean, it's cool. I think it's cool how that gets passed back and forth between the book.
Who wrote the line? I don't even remember who wrote.
I don't know. That's why I was hoping you'd answer first.
I don't remember who wrote it or any of that.
I can't remember. I can't remember.
But I knew that we both knew that it worked.
Yeah.
One of those weird things, right? Because, you know, at the time, the hashtag had really sort of become a very different thing than we had known the hashtag for, because it was hashtag Michael Brown, hashtag, you know, Black Lives Matter, right? That was sort of the beginning of the hashtag becoming a very different thing, and being used for activism in a very different way. What I will tell you, though, is that for me, it means something very different, though, just because what I realized in making the book is how the victims and the people who are experiencing this and their families, how their children's death has become a searchable thing. And that makes it really hard to grieve, right? So while we turn people into movements and symbols, somebody's mom has to see hashtag Michael Brown over and over again. And if she happens to type in hashtag Michael Brown, she has to see video footage of his murder forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And I think, so for me, that hashtag was complicated. Hashtags in general are complicated because I think though we use them to propel a movement, I think we also strip families of peaceful moments to grieve and mourn the human being that they lost, not the hashtag that they were turned into.
Okay. If no one else has anything to say, then I'll just move on to the final question and wrap this up. So many people get different messages from the same book, but when you were writing, what was your hope for how all American boys can contribute to conversations about racial inequality and social injustice, specifically in literature? Let's start with Brendan, then Jason.
Thank you, first of all, and if this is near the end, thanks to everybody involved. And I want to say that one of the reasons for wanting to co-write this book was for me as a white person in America, when thinking about it and engaging in conversations about racial justice, it's a conversation. And I think my role, especially as a white person, first and foremost, is to listen to the truth, experience, stories, and wisdom of folks who have been fighting for racial justice in this country and are doing so out of the lived experience of racial injustice in this country for so long. And so one of the things that I hope that people get out of the book and out of Quinn Collins' side of the book in particular is the value of what it means to listen. Listening is an action. It's not passive. It's a way to participate meaningfully if we do so meaningfully. And I think for me, I wanted to try to find a way to write a book about learning how to be a better listener. And I think that if we could embrace that, especially those of us who are white like me, to embrace that instead of having to focus so much on being right or wrong, and instead focus on an opportunity to learn, we might, in fact, find more ways to nurture racial justice in this country and combat racial injustice. If we listened to people when they were talking about how quickly all the principles of Reconstruction were being dismantled, then maybe we would have participated in keeping them in place. If we had listened to the real serious threat of what it meant for the rise of the KKK and other, groups, terrorist organizations as such in our country, maybe we would have been able to stop them before they got so much tread. If we listened to the stories of folks who are scared that ICE might knock on their door because of the accent in their last name, maybe we would be more empathetic to what it feels like to live under threat, even here in the United States. If we listened more to Indigenous folks when they say, we feel offended when you choose sports names after our people, maybe we would understand a bit more why their care and concern and their hearts and their stories and their cultures are more important than our barbecue wings and fries on Sunday afternoon. I think it's important for us to learn how to listen, and I think it's okay to write a book about learning how to listen. And so that's what I was hoping people would get out of Quinn Collins's half of the book, at least.
And I think, for me, there's a lot I think one might take from the book. I'd like to believe that the art speaks for itself, but I think what I find most important and more important is actually the story of Brendan and I. So All American Boys is something born out of something else. And even though it's a piece of art that has particular statements and it has a particular mission and telling a particular story, for me, the actual story is about this friendship. The truth of the matter is that I hope that we get to serve or have served as an example of what is possible when there is trust and communication. When a person can look another person in the eye and tell them the truth, can say that that it hurts me, that I don't feel that it isn't right, and that I need you to not try to fix me or correct me. I need you to take a moment and hear what I have to say, right? And open your heart. You know what I mean? Like, be a person, be a human being, right? And we can engage in that way. And we might even be able to find some common ground and make something that'll make the next generation a bit safer, right? So for me, that more than anything, and we even had almost like a constitution that we wrote before we even started writing the book. There will not be any white saviors. There will be no egos. And if our friendship is ruined because of this book, then the book means nothing to us.
I love this man.
Yeah, this is my guy.
Thank you all so much for that. I really appreciate that. The way that you mentioned this book is essentially boils down to the story about both of you. And it's about being a human being, about being able to connect and being able to have those conversations together, because what is the point? And Brandon, I know you answered this already, but I would love to hear some more of your thoughts on this, and also from you, Jason. And this is our absolute last question. So the New York Public Library's Book for All campaign, the library worked with Simon and Schuster to make your book, All American Boys, available for readers across the country to borrow and read freely. Can you talk about what it means in a time when a lot of books are being challenged or banned and access to titles, including your very own book, All American Boys, is being restricted?
I appreciate the question, and I'm just going to say that I was just in communication. I was writing letters to a school board in Florida this week because the county right across the way from Orlando wanted to ban All American Boys, and I was writing letters to explain what it meant, in particular to students that Jason and I met while we were in Orlando, right down the road from where this book was trying to be banned. And I am grateful to hear by the end of this week that through the efforts of an enormous amount of families and teachers and librarians right there in Florida, in this particular county, All American Boys will not be banned. And I say that because it required an enormous amount of effort of people coming together and talking about why the book was important. And I'm grateful that people are talking about All American Boys, but there are thousands of books that require this kind of solidarity and love and support. And it requires more of us to get more involved. So what my hope is that by hosting such a spectacular program as you are here at the NYPL, it inspires a lot more of us to get involved and to write our letters to folks, or to act as volunteers, as that bookstore in Asheville, North Carolina, that collected the tens of thousands of banned books from Florida and that couldn't be shipped there because the books had been banned, packed them up and repackaged them and mailed them to individual families that wanted them in the state of Florida. I mean, what a gift that all those folks in Asheville, North Carolina did for folks in Florida. I hope that what your question really leads to is, how do more of us get involved? And thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Brendan. I mean, I'm testifying on Monday, you know, and looking forward to it, to let people know exactly what is happening. I mean, we're talking about wing clipping here, you know, and I think people don't really understand that sometimes, is that this is a conversation around wing clipping, right? What do you do when, you know, I had a buddy of mine, he's an East African guy I used to work with, and he said whenever they were chasing the chickens, when they would catch the chicken, the first thing you did, even though chickens don't even fly, he said the first thing you do is you break their wings, right? And he's like, and then it becomes much easier. Everything else becomes much easier. And I think that's what it feels like. I think that but I also really believe that one, that our young people know, right? It's really hard to keep young people in the dark these days. And so even down in Florida, everything in me says the young people know what is going on, and they know that something is wrong, right? And so when it comes to getting involved, same thing Brendan said, you know, call your local libraries, figure out ways, and exercise some humility also. I think as writers, what happens is we get all like, you know, we get on our horses and we ride into towns that are not our towns, and we make a mess of things prematurely. Brendan and I have done this many, many times before, and we've learned over the years that actually it's about alliances and making sure that you figure out how to be of service and say, you tell me what you need and I can do the thing you need me to do. But I don't know the dynamics of your community, and I don't want to do anything to put you in harm's way or your job at risk or your life at risk, which we have experienced. And so I think it's all about reaching out to the people who are already doing that work and see how you can be of service, putting your ego to the background. This is not a moment for you to be a superhero. It's a moment for you to be a part of a superhero team.
That's right.
Thank you for those exceptional advice. And the way that you put it really is incredibly profound, both of you. And on that note, I'm thrilled to announce the next title in our Books for All Teens Banned Book Club series. The focus of our next book club is The Downstairs Girls by Stacey Lee, a thrilling work of historical fiction about a young Chinese American woman who finds her voice and fights for justice in the post-Civil War South. You can borrow The Downstairs Girl right now through our free e-reader app, Simply E, which is available for iPhones and Androids. Plus, we'll love for you to join us at our next Teen Banned Book Club event, where we'll be talking to the author, Stacey Lee. And that's on Thursday, April 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And thank you all so much for joining us today in our conversation. And of course, a big thanks to our teen reading ambassadors, Olivia and Emily, for the insightful questions. And a thank you to Brandon and Jason for their thoughtful answers. Bye, everyone.